Elden Ring at its core is a cacophony of mysteries and secrets, and in today's video I have a mystery that has not been discussed, has not been discovered, which is quite hard considering Elden Ring is now a year and a half old. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we discuss Elden Ring's biggest mystery you've never heard of. One of the very first things we hear when we boot up a new save of Elden Ring is grace. The grace long lost. But what is grace? Grace is a power bestowed upon the inhabitants of the lands between by the greater will and outer god after it took hold of the lands between. And while it seemed benevolent and kind at first glance, in true From Software fashion, this was all a trick of the light. It did not have the interests of the inhabitants of the lands between at heart. First example of this is the fact that really, you cannot leave the lands between if you have grace. It binds you to the land, controls you, and really keeps you captive in this never-ending nightmare of death. Notice how the only people we actually see leave the lands between are the tarnished and Godfrey, who were in fact robbed of their grace and exiled out of the lands between. Don't you think it's also curious that no matter what path of life you walk upon, when you are chosen by grace, you are forced to come back. Even if you hate the idea of the lands between and the greater will, you come back. It's very peculiar to me, until you consider the possibility that perhaps there is no choice, there is no decision. Your kind returns to the lands between whether they like it or not. Our thoughts were took out of our hands, our choices were took out of our hands by beings of incomprehensible power, beings we can never, beings we will never understand. And while yes, there are boats seen leaving the lands between on the map, we never actually see them leave. This would also play into why they try and leave, even though there are sea monsters, there are massive whirlpools, they are in a desperate attempt to leave their prison. But that is only one aspect of this infection the greater will possesses over the lands between. There is also the inhabitants. Now you might be thinking, we've just talked about the inhabitants, fuck you on Gecko, but please bear with me. Tens upon tens upon tens of millions of years ago, our oxygen in our world used to be a lot richer. The results of this? Certain species evolved. They took more oxygen into themselves and grew bigger, grew stronger. Although this wasn't every single species that existed in that time period, there were quite a few. We know Elden Ring takes a lot of inspiration from the real world, and more specifically, that exact time period where this whole oxygen change in species occurred. For example, Pangaea is literally the same size and shape at certain times as the lands between. And what do we see all over the lands between? Strange and mutated creatures. And while it's okay to assume that perhaps these species were always like this, I'm just going to come out and say it that I find this very unlikely. If you look at the primordial crucible, which was the beginning of all life as we know it, if you take a look at some of the creatures that existed in the age of the crucible, you'll find they are very different to the kind of shapes and sizes that exist inside of the lands between as we know it today. The Crucible era species are a lot smaller than a lot of things we see in the lands between today. Not to mention the stumps of the primordial crucible that grow all over their bodies. But when the greater will took over, when the greater will spread its grace across the land and the primordial crucible was sent into non-existence, this all changed. And although slight vestiges of the crucible can still be found in the misbegotten, the omens, and the ancestral followers deep underground, I'll give a bit of an explanation on these. Right, so the ancestral followers, they're deep underground, they're cut off from grace. I mean, why else would they be down here? They've been living here for eons, as we know the whole of the rivers. I'm not going to try and pronounce the river name, because I got flamed the last time when I said it wrong. But if all the structures of the Eternal City weren't there, it'd just be all one interconnected land. Right, the Nox was sent underground by the greater will, and they are graceless. Now, this makes me think perhaps there's something about this underground area which cuts you off from grace. The scarlet rot's down here, the death prince is down here, all this graceless shit is down here. So this makes me think perhaps there's something special about the underground. Maybe its connection to the primordial crucible has something to do with it. Oh, like a lot of things in this video, that is just a theory. But getting back onto topic, with grace, animals mutated, becoming a lot larger. A great example being the room bear. We can actually see room bears in an earlier form of evolution. Why they're still in this earlier form of evolution is really unknown. We might never know, but it is there, and they are basically identical. The only thing that I can really think of is that they are somehow separated from grace, but I can't really think of what a bear could have done to be separated from grace. They don't really drop anything special, they're just pretty ordinary. Now the next two, I believe, are very interlinked. You've got the beastmen of Farum Azula and the demi-humans. Both basically mean the same thing, but different names. The beastmen of Farum Azula are part beast and part man, hence the name. Now the demi-humans, this gets a bit interesting. Demi-humans and demigods sound very similar. Demi means half, so half human, but what else? That is the question. Perhaps we'll never know. All we can really do as of now is theorise. Though I do believe they are part of the same evolutionary family, just at different stages. I really do believe this to be the case, but sadly there's no definitive proof. This is just a theory, so please remember that. If you have any ideas, please let me know down in the comments, and I mean that from every point of the video. I don't want to be spreading misinformation. If I have, let me know. If you have something else to add to the video, let me know and I'll update it in the pinned comments. Not too long back I talked a lot about the giant skulls inside of Caelid, the mountaintop of the giants, and their connections and heritage to the giants. And while I still stick by everything I said in that video, but I also do think this evolving grace theory may or may not have had a more heavier impact on the giants than I initially gave it credit. The fire giants' mountain flame had everything to do with their culture. It gave them their powers and it gave them their will. So when the grace-given warriors came and destroyed their kind, you've got to think, what effects did that have on them? What if the reason why they're shriveled away is because grace took over the land and their fell god's power was reduced and diminished? But also, in the same sense, the reason they could have shriveled away and died in the way they did, perhaps it could just simply be that they're so far away from their necessary power, their necessary flame, that they just bit the dust and said peace out and dipped. I genuinely would not be surprised at all. And while the whole video we have talked about grace and the greater will and its effects on the world, it wasn't just the greater will. There's also the formless mother and all the other outer gods. They all affected their parts of the world in very different ways. Like for example, in the Mohgwyn dynasty, the big birds from Caelid, they pop up here and they are consumed by the blood of the formless mother, popping out the blood rivers. They have pus coming out of their face, massive bulbuses poking out of their skin, and those bulbuses just so happen to remind me a lot of the Black Death bulbuses. And now when you look at this, and then paired to the fact that blood is often associated with death, you have a really compelling story for the formless mother affecting the land. Another example of an outer god abusing their powers and affecting the lands between would be the moon outer god. Now, the moon and stars, they're connected, at least in my opinion from everything we know. The Corians hail the stars and the moon, all the item descriptions seems to say there too. The stars hold horrifying eldritch beasts, and while it's not directly evolving anything, like the formless mother and like the greater will, it's still affecting the lands between in a way that is really detrimental. It reminds me a lot of 65 million years ago, dinosaurs wiped off the face of the earth by a massive meteor. That is what it reminds me of. It's a cataclysmic event caused by an outer god. Well, until Radhn stopped it. but our dumbasses just decide to undo it again. Imagine the state of the lands between if Radhn hadn't stopped that initial impact. It would have been catastrophic. Sadly everyone, that is the end of the video. If you did enjoy, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. I wanted to say I am sorry for the inconsistent uploads. I was really planning on getting this out a few days ago, but some stuff just happened and my mind's just been so full of stuff that I haven't been able to concentrate enough to make a video worth even making. So I've just took a few days off and I'm back now, and I'm going to really try to make more consistent uploads, because making videos like so soon after each other, it's really fun just fully going at it, and I'm sorry I haven't been able to do that. Popping up on the screen right now should be some of our previous videos, and also, I forget to say this basically every video, in the pinned comment and the top of the description is the Discord link. I won't hold your ears any longer. May you find your worth in the waking world. Goodbye everyone.